Hello, and thank you for joining us, everyone. We are back with Service Secrets, and I am Dave Murray. I'm the Senior Consultant for the DeJulius Group, and I am pleased to be joined today by Dave Sanderson. A lot of you already know that name, but for those of you that don't, Dave was a passenger on U.S. Air Flight 1549, which most of us know as the Miracle on the Hudson. If you recall, it was the plane that ditched in the Hudson River on January 15, 2009. Dave is also author of Moments Matter, How One Defining Moment Can Create a Lifetime of Purpose. So Dave, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be with everybody today.
Well, we're excited to have you today. We're also excited to have you at our Secret Service Summit in September, so just a few months away. We're really looking forward to having you there this year. So I want to start with this question. It is a big question, admittedly, but having the opportunity to speak with you to me is so cool. So here's the question I have. I don't want to give too much away about what you're going to speak about when you're here in Cleveland for the summit, but here's what I want to ask. You were in a situation that was life or death. A plane goes down, and what is so cool about your story and so cool about what you did is you helped so many others. And my question is this. We'd all like to think that we would do that if we were in that situation, but as we know, that doesn't always happen, right? History tells us that. So what were you thinking during that time?
Well, thank you for the question. It's during the Miracle on the Hudson, as the plane crossed over the George Washington Bridge, candidly, like many others on the plane, probably most everybody, and we didn't think we were coming back. It was very quiet on the plane. I think everybody was internalized. So my thoughts were that I was just getting ready to go to another realm, another dimension, because candidly, you just don't see many successful crashes in water. But when we got down, everything sort of shifted, because that's when everything started moving very quickly, and we had a chance at that point. So my thoughts basically were initially was just get up to the gal, get up and get out. It wasn't about saving anybody, helping anybody. It was really first looking internally, but things changed for me as things were moving on, because what happened was I was a seat 15A. When I got to the aisle, I heard my mother talking to me. My mother had passed away in 1997, but she had a big impact on me, and I heard her saying, if you do the right thing, God will take care of you. And at that point in time, the right thing for me was to help other people. See, I grew up in Southwest Ohio. I played sports, athletics, Boy Scouts. I was always with a group of guys and a team, and everybody always looked after each other back then. So that's why I waited in the back of the plane until we got everybody out. So my initial mindset was not really focused on external. It was focused on internal. But when I heard that in my head, all of a sudden sort of refocused me, and I had to make a choice on what to do. And that choice was to help other people, because some other people were having challenges. Some people had some difficult times. There was an elderly lady in the back that didn't want to leave. And candidly, a few of us, it's not me, if there's a few of us, were trying to get her out. And once we got her out, that's when things started really happening. So it was definitely about that. That was a really big lesson in teamwork and leadership.
Wow, what a story. And for those of our viewers that don't know this, you were one of the last, if not the last people to walk off the back of that plane that day, correct?
I was the last passenger off the back of the plane, and Good Morning America had a picture of me being the last passenger off the plane. So I didn't even know that until I was on Good Morning America, and all of a sudden I see my picture and people were noting it. I'm like, wow, that really blew me away.
Wow, I bet. That's amazing. So here's the next question I have for you, Dave. I know that when you speak and when you deliver keynotes, and I'm so looking forward to seeing you here in Cleveland, that one of the things that you talk about is really crisis management. What do you do during a time of crisis? And to me, that's something that's so important, because it's one of those things that we all go through at one time or another, but there's very little crisis management learnings out there, school or even continuing education. So can you just share a little bit about some of the teachings you deliver to your audiences?
Most definitely, and especially what's going on in the country right now with all the situations that are happening in Baton Rouge and Dallas and all over the world. It's crisis management is something that's I think most people don't know, have never really had to handle or don't know how to handle. And fortunately for me, not only did I go through a situation that I got to employ what I learned, but I was with Tony Robbins for 10 years and head of security with him for 5. So I got to learn a lot from him. because not only from personal situation, but also in business. What I call this is everybody has their own personal plane crash. Everybody in their life has something they will face, and it's inevitable. Whether it's a fire, a flood, a health situation, whatever it may be, it's all the way you manage your mind or how you manage your state through that. And what I've learned over the years, and what helped me that day, and what's helped me in business, is I can manage. I've learned how to manage my state on a moment's notice, and how I do that is three different ways. If I'm able, I change the way I move my body. It's called physiology, and just get myself in a different position. So you'll watch maybe a batter go up to bat in a Major League Baseball game. You notice they'll do a routine every time. That's to get themselves in that right state to be able to face that pitcher. It's the same kind of thing. Move your body. The second thing is, how you talk to yourself. It's the kind of questions you ask yourself. And on the plane that day, I couldn't get up and move my body because I was down on a brace position, but I did two things. The way I talked to myself, I was giving myself reinforcement. If I make it through this, what's my game plan? So I changed the questions I ask myself. And the third thing was I changed the focus. And when I talked to Captain Sullenberger, and I've done this many times, but the first time I talked to him, I was talking about his mindset, and it was all about the way he had to manage his focus at that moment. It was the same for me and probably other people, that candidly I couldn't get up and move, and I really started asking questions of myself. But how did I focus my mind? Because one thing you realize going through a plane crash or something that happens to you, most of the times you can't control the circumstances, but you can control how you manage your mind and how you respond. And that's the three things that I speak about, especially when it comes to customer service. One of the things I was noted for in all the years of my sales and account management career was my high level of customer retention. And the reason why is I focused on my customers' outcomes instead of my outcomes. It sounds simplistic, which it is, but it got me in trouble a lot with the companies that I served, because they thought I was working more for the company on their advocacy than my company that I was working for. But what they found out is I had such a high client retention, high repeat business. It candidly served me greatly to a point where I always became the top salesperson in my organization, because over the years you build that rapport and you build that. So I want to tie that when I speak up in Cleveland about how it not only ties to personal situation, but how it ties to your business and customer retention.
That's an interesting point. So in your sales career, it sounds like you had some folks that were a little suspicious of your tactics until they saw the proof in the pudding.
Most definitely. I remember one or two times in my career that when I did my annual review, I got marked down for around the way I sort of advocated for the company, because I've negotiated with my clients and worked on their behalf. And finally, my vice president, to my last vice president where I was with Oracle, he and I had a talk, and he understood that candidly, I had 4 or 5 clients that I could count on at any moment in time, not only for the business side, but also when things got tough. When you get in that client situation where you're in an implementation and it's go or no go time, you got to have each other's backs. And we had each other's backs. So when times got tough at 2:00 in the morning, like that commercial you may have seen on TV, who's taking that call at 2:00 in the morning? Well, I was taking the call, right? I was taking the call, not the customer service folks. So I was the one that's dealing it. So they had faith in me. And once he realized that, I never got marked down again on my reviews, but I remember a couple of times I got marked down. I was really suspicious of why, but then I understood from their perspective that they wanted a higher margin. But candidly, sometimes you can take a smaller margin but build it over time, and all of a sudden you have a long-lasting customer, and they're not going anyplace.
What a great message, especially for our audience here in Cleveland. So I'm excited for them to hear that message as you tie your story to such practical things as customer service. It's a great message.
Well, that's going to be the same thing I want to talk about too, about from the other side of the equation. When I was a client for U.S. Airways, this thing could have turned a whole different direction, right? A lot of people may have said, why would you fly U.S. Airways again? It's because of the way they served me during and after the plane crash. I'm going to tell that story about, how when you go through a crisis like I went through a crisis, and 154 other of us went through a crisis, why I'm an advocate for U.S. Airways, which is now American Airlines, and fly them 99% of the time now, because the way they took care of me made me a lifelong client of American Airlines.
Wow, great message. So here's my next question for you, Dave. I have to imagine that through your book and through your keynotes that you have inspired thousands and thousands of people. And so my question is this: are there any particular stories? You must get a lot of feedback. So are there any particular stories the message that you deliver that really stand out to you?
There's so many, and you're right. I've been very honored to speak over 700 plus times around the world, and you get feedback. But as I'm thinking about that, probably the one thing that stands out, and this happened about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago now, when I spoke at the Supreme Court. And what was interesting about that, I'd never been to the Supreme Court, number one, which was a great experience. But Associate Justice Kennedy was the one who sponsored my talk at the Supreme Court when I spoke on behalf that night. And once I got in, he grabbed me and said, "Come to my quarters and give me the 3-minute version of what happened." So he and I, in his quarters, had a one-on-one. I had a one-on-one with a Supreme Court justice about what happened to me. And he thanked me, and I went on and did my thing that night. And we raised $6 million, which is a great thing. But that stood out to me that he was that interested in knowing the details from somebody like me who came. I'm just a guy out doing what I was doing on business, and it really stuck with me that you're never too big, to really understand what's going on out there. And that's why I think now what's going on in this country, people got to get back down to the basics. Let's understand what people are really about on each end, and I think we can come to a better resolution on these things.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It sometimes just comes down to that personal relationship, and sometimes we all seem a little too busy for it, but they're so important.
Most definitely.
So the last question I have for you is this. What can someone in our audience here in Cleveland in September at our Secret Service Summit, the last 2 days of the month of September, what would you want someone to take away after they hear you speak? What are the 1 or 2 things that you really want people to walk out of that room saying wow about?
Well, that's a great question because, when I do my talks, every group is different. But I think in Cleveland, what I'm going to try to impart is 2 different things. Number one is, like I mentioned earlier, we can't control our circumstances, but we can control the way we respond and the way we manage our minds. So I'm really going to talk about that in a number of different ways, not only from a plane crash in my situation, but from business and a personal relationship. That's number one. But number 2 is something that really has served me well, especially when in business. And I learned this years ago from my first mentor. His name was Bill. And I'm going to talk about Bill when I come to Cleveland. But Bill taught me this because Bill had those 60 or 70 years of experience that I got to use, where that's hard to find somebody with that kind of experience. And he always told me, and it was reinforced over and over, it's not about the resources that you have, it's about the resourcefulness that you do with it. So right now in this world is, a lot of people say, I don't have the resources to be able to do this or that. But it's the people with the most resourcefulness are the ones who are accomplishing things. And that's the second point, because on a plane that day, I'll just leave you with this. On a plane going down that day, the only resource I had was my mind. And I think the only resource most people on that plane had on their mind. So they had to manage it in a way that they could be resourceful. And candidly, you're in a crash, water's rising in a plane, it's dark, you have other people which you don't know what they're going to do. You had to be resourceful on how, number one, you're going to get out of the plane. But second, getting down was one thing, getting out is another thing. So I'm going to talk about the different resources that I use and how I had to become very resourceful just to get off the plane and get to an opportunity to be saved, which is a whole nother story of that day.
Wow, what a message. And as you were saying that, Dave, I couldn't help but think in my own travels, as I go around and speak to companies and work with companies, how often I hear that today in corporate America that, oh, we just can't do that. We can't do this. We don't have the funding for that. And you hear that all the time. And it's so much of a focus on what we can't do as opposed to finding some ways to do some things.
And I'm going to tell a story about when I was with KPMG years ago about being able to acquire one of the largest clients in the world, which this name will be recognizable when I talk about in Cleveland. And how does somebody with a zero relationship go from zero to having a relationship with one of the largest companies in the world? It wasn't because we were better than everybody else. It was because how resourceful, how we went about it was the way we did it. And all of a sudden, they acquired one of the biggest names in this world, which I'll share with you in Cleveland.
Wow, I can't wait for that. And I can't wait to see you speak here at the Secret Service Summit. Dave, I'm really looking forward to seeing you at the summit. I personally really, really love how you deliver such a motivational message, but it's so practical as well. So I can't wait to see you in Cleveland. I'm sure a lot of our attendees feel the same way. Thank you again for your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to come to Cleveland and have an outstanding week.
Thank you. You too. We'll see you in September.
Sounds great. Thank you.